Welcome to another edition of the Trucking on Route 66 in Missouri Oral History Project, a collaborative initiative between the Missouri State University Libraries and OzarksAlive.com. I'm Kaitlyn McConnell with Ozarks Alive. My colleague on this oral history project is Tom Peters from Missouri State University Libraries. This project is made possible in part by a grant from the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program of the National Park Service. We are now in June 14th, I believe, 2018. And my guest today is Susan Scott, who was involved with yellow freight trucking for a number of years, and we are actually at Bonniebrook doing this interview. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. And first off, I just kind of want to set the stage. You know, how did you get involved in trucking, and what years were you involved, that sort of thing?
It had an unusual beginning at Yellow Freight because I had moved from Oklahoma City, where my background was oil and gas accounting, and I was working for W.R. Grace, a large petroleum company in Oklahoma City. Moved to Overland Park, Kansas area, and that's where Yellow Freight is. And I lucked out that what they had done was they had started a subsidiary called Overland Energy. And Overland Energy was right down my alley of what I had been doing at W.R. Grace. So they were looking for a manager, and I was very fortunate to get hired there. After a number of years, they decided that the goal of having their own access to energy wasn't what the direction that they really wanted to go. So they ended up selling and getting out of the Overland Energy, and fortunately for me, I was promoted to a larger position of managing a revenue accounting area. Okay.
Like what time period was that around?
I was there from 1981 to 1996. So okay. I retired after 15 years. So
okay.
Receive a nice check. I do. That's nice.
Well, and it works out well because I guess I should have put some more context when I went ahead and said where we were at Bonniebrook. It helps you be able to volunteer out here and live around Branson instead. So
yes, it's wonderful.
Yes. What was the industry like at that time? You know, we've done interviews through a variety of time periods, people going back to the 50s and 60s, and it sounds like it was much different at that time than even into the 80s when deregulation and things like that were getting ready to happen. So
yes.
Kind of in the early 80s when you started, what was the atmosphere like, and how did it evolve over that 15 years that you were involved?
We saw big changes in technology. That was a biggie. And adjusting to the technology to meet the needs of the customers, the number one priority. Yellow Freight very, very involved in customer feedback and what are they needing type thing. So it was a ever evolving thing of improving the systems to give the customers what they need. You know, is it invoicing? Do they need something better in invoicing? There was one whole section that reported to me that it was for the largest customers that wanted to have it was a consolidation group where instead of them getting invoices from all over the United States, they were getting it all in one area. So it was called Central Collections. And so they specialized in working with those very important companies that they were working with. And but what you see and it really within the last 2 years of my employment there at Yellow Freight, they were really tough years because they were really improving and doing a lot of changes with the computer system, and it was tough. I mean, you know, there were times where we were working 7 days a week, late at night, you know, and then getting feedback from the customers, what's working, what's not working, and improving the systems. So the accounting and finance area was constantly working with the technology group. But I think now, when I look back on it, and I think, wow, with computers like they are now, what we could have done just you know, each employee would have a computer, and you would have all this access of things. You wouldn't have to ask, you know, in the past you would write something up and say, here's what we need it to do, and it'd go through this process. And this is true at all companies. It was the same way at an insurance company I worked at prior, and the petroleum company. And you wouldn't be able yourself to go in and say, let's design what we need. Let's go into this computer like you can now. Go in, make you an Excel spreadsheet, and you could tell that customer exactly, here's what you need to know. Instead, you'd have to apply for whatever, and they would determine priority in the listing, and they'd have programmers that would do it. So I think, wow, the strides that have been made just with technology since I've left Yellow Freight have probably really helped a lot, for sure.
Well, you know, it makes sense that computers would instantly help things like accounting in those areas.
Oh,
But
definitely.
even like for the truck drivers themselves, did they see computers like affecting the way they were running routes and doing things at that level too?
Yes, because that happened during the time while I was there, where, you know, and it kind of weirded some of them out at first, because everybody knows where I am. They know I stopped. They know I'm going. But that was all, again, trying to figure out the best, you know, are we using the best routes? Are we utilizing our truck drivers to the most efficient, whatever? So, yeah, that was interesting. Also, you mentioned deregulation, and all that had an impact for sure, because when you start watching, especially if, you know, not to get into the politics of it, but say the Teamsters go on strike, then you've got a period of time where it doesn't hit the accounting department for a while. And then here it comes, and then we have to lay people off until the strike, not only till it's over, but till business starts cranking back up. So then you have, all during that period of time, the concern, are we going to lose our customers to the, you know, to the non-union companies that weren't on strike? So you've got this unusual accounting thing going on, because there's this delay before you really have to lay people off. That was hard. It's very hard. But you knew that once the Teamsters got back and everybody was okay, then most of the employees would get to come back. Sometimes not. If you've lost some major customers, then there might be a delay. You've got to win them back, is what you have to do.
That would feel like you were constantly on pins and needles if you know, were always thinking you had to prove, you had to always be making sure that you had those good customer relationships in case the strike did happen or something, that you didn't lose that momentum.
If they don't go, that's right. You've got a momentum going.
Wow.
And yeah, that was really interesting to watch how that all worked.
What were some of the main routes that the Yellow Freight drivers were running? And I mean, I guess I'm thinking in '81, Route 66 was technically still commissioned, but were they use it? How often did they use that at that point that you know of?
Well, I couldn't answer.
That's fine.
I don't know, but Yellow Freight, of course, was not only nationwide; they were also down into Mexico, and we had Spanish-speaking. Hispanic employees that in our accounting department that could get on there and talk to the individuals that were working for Yellow Freight that were down in Mexico. So you're talking a large area all over the United States and then down into Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah.
What were some of the things they hauled the most, that the company hauled?
Oh, wow. I'm thinking, I know one of the major companies that they hauled for was Ford Motor.
Oh, wow.
Ford Motor. So, you know, you're talking all kinds of stuff. Not the cars, but the parts. And you've got, you know, an infinite variety of parts and manufacturing places that are making the parts, and then you're getting them all together to the place where they put them all together to make the car. So they had some huge customers like that. So it's just a really big variety of trucking things. Yeah.
And I would never, I guess I never stopped to think that the parts for cars are actually made someplace different than where the cars are made.
And then you got to get it all to the same place and coordinating all that, this logistics that started. In fact, that, talking about logistics and the companies that were involved in logistics of all of this that we're talking about, that started coming on toward the end of my career at Yellow Freight. Now it's, you know, all the truck lines are doing it, you know, coming up with best ways of doing this and that, whatever.
Were your drivers, as far as you knew of, pretty similar demographics, or did you have a little bit of everybody who worked as drivers?
I would say a little bit of everybody.
Okay.
I mean, you know, there isn't one type of person that it appeals to.
So it was interesting because it's like I said before, we've spoken with a lot of people about different periods of trucking, and I know some of the guys I've talked to, especially like in the 50s and 60s, it was mainly younger men, you know, some of them that were just getting out and looking for a job and starting a family and things like that. And then you kind of saw that the industry age through.
That's true.
You know, and so I was just thinking, I wonder from at that time period, you know, if that had, you know, people already would have had an opportunity to make a career of it, you know, if they started when they were younger and stayed with it longer.
The truck drivers, I know for Yellow and many others, they did very well by staying with the one carrier, you know, not moving around, don't go, and stay with it till you retire, and they did very well. But you're right, I don't remember seeing, and we would go for different reasons to the main terminals that were in Kansas City area there, and for different meetings, etc. And I would say that that's pretty true. You didn't see a lot of real young men, because they had stayed in there, and man, they were going to retire. So there they were. But I think in talking to them, a lot of people, you don't understand the sacrifice that those people have made. And at the time I was there at Yellow, I would say, I don't know that we had many women drivers for sure at that point in time. I see them now. As I'm going down the road, I'm always looking. But at that time, it was mainly, I would say, huge percentage were men.
Well, and that was one of my other questions was, even from your perspective, you know, with the type of job you had, were there other women who worked there, or were you kind of in the minority?
There were a lot of other women that were in the clerical positions that reported to me. When I was hired at Yellow Freight to be manager of the Overland Energy, and then I went on to be manager of the Revenue Accounting Department. At the time of my retirement, I had 140 employees reporting to me. They were all women except for 2 or 3 men that were in the mail department for the revenue accounting area. So they were women. However, when I would go to a manager's meeting, it would be me and maybe an HR person that were the 2 women managers in a big, huge room. Yeah. It's true.
Wow.
But actually treated very well. I mean, you know, that you see a lot of things today about things that are issues that come up, and really, you know, we did very well. That we kind of stood out when you got into a meeting, you know, but everyone was very respectful.
Well, I mean, that's great. That's a good thing to hear. I mean, you hear negative stories so often that it's great that one wasn't one.
Yeah. I think I will say, and you probably won't even want to use this, but when I was first hired there as a manager, I was the only manager in the accounting finance, and I was manager of the Overland Energy. And I went into a manager's meeting, and it was a huge, huge room at the home office there in Overland Park. And I mean, it was like, I don't know, it was over 100 people. And there I was, you know. Had 3 guys come up to me, and I was very new. And they came up to me, and the one said, Susan Scott, yeah, and all this. And he said, well, we want you to know this is a hairy-legged business. And I said, well, that's great. I'll fit right in. And they all stood there and they went, and from there on, it was fine.
Wow.
Never had any trouble. But they were wanting me to know I was joining this boys club, you know. But I didn't really take it, you know, to me that's a very funny thing, I thought, as it turned out. But after that, what they said was, welcome to Yellow Freight. And they all shook my hand, and after that, everything was fine, so.
I wonder how much impact that comment had on everything else. I mean, if that kind of...
I think it helped.
Yeah.
Because they saw, they expected me to go, well,
yeah,
la, la, la.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I don't know where it came from. I kind of have a regular sense of humor to not, you got to look at things from their perspective, and so I think that helped. Yeah, for those 15 years. Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about how a lot of Yellow Freight drivers wanted to retire from there, so I'm guessing that this is probably not an issue you guys dealt with, but in some of the other interviews too, people talked about how, at least at some point in the past, drivers were very, I guess, flighty, where they would be out driving and even get a better job offer and like leave the truck and the freight and go with somebody else. Did you guys ever experience any of that you recall? I mean, I hope not, because that sounded awful, but... Yeah,
no. I think Yellow Freight was, it was like, for a long time, it was like number 3 and in the trucking industry of LTL. There they were number 3. You had, I forget which one, Roadway or Con Freight was there, and then the 3 merged. But what you've got is you've got somebody that's way up at top. They're offering the best salaries, the benefits were fabulous, they had all these special plans, and I think it made a big difference in the drivers staying there. I'm not aware of people moving a lot. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, you mentioned, trying to win over prospective clients and have those relationships and stuff. How would a company, what would a company do to try to persuade a prospective client that they were the best option? Was it that they'd get your stuff there the fastest, or they were the cheapest, or what was the strategy?
I don't think it was always just cheap, but it was getting it there safely, knowing how, because I know at Yellow Freight and the other large ones, they were making sure everyone knew how to, and were trained in how to pack that trailer, which sounds kind of crazy, but just the shaking of items. You might have it packed solid, but the way the, shaking going down the road, so they studied it and they learned, here's the best way to do this. They were really big on studying and training the drivers and the loaders, the people loading in the truck. Here's how you can do it safely and without hurting your back or do whatever. So I think, I don't remember hearing a lot of negative. I think it was because they were one of the better ones when you compare them to some of the smaller companies that didn't have the infrastructure that a Yellow Freight would have. Yeah.
You mentioned loading things where you didn't hurt your back. Were workers' injuries something that had become more of a consideration at that point, or has that always been an evolutionary kind of development?
I couldn't answer that. I do know that they were very, watchful of it, and they had training sessions, and when they'd find out new things, doing this, doing that, they would get the drivers together and have some training. So it was never, okay, you've been with us for 10 years, you don't need to know anything. So they were always educating and evolving.
Did most of the drivers live around like the base up in that area?
I would say yes. I don't know. But see, they have terminals. They had all these terminals all over the United States. So you've got, you had, of course, the main office there in the Kansas side. Then over in Kansas City, Missouri, you've got this huge terminal where things are moving and going and all that. So really, you've got employees all over the United States that are drivers that may be from other places, and they're out of those particular places.
So I was just thinking, like you're talking about with ongoing trainings and education and stuff, and it's like, I have to remember how people communicated before we had email and cell phones and computers, but it seems like that would be another layer of complicated when you're dealing with truck drivers who are very rarely at home, and
True.
So
how do you get them together?
Yeah, how did you guys do that?
How do you do that? I don't know. I don't know how they did it. I do know they were good about listening, and maybe a lot of the truck lines did it. They were good about listening to the drivers. Like, is there a certain seat, that has cushions that do something, that does whatever, that help the drivers? And it helps, helps relieve back pain and do all this. They did a lot of extra things like that. From where we were sitting and watching, that they really did go extra effort to try to help.
I guess, they need, I'm sure, an investment in the people just because they want to be nice, but also because they don't want to lose the drivers.
They don't want to lose those long-term drivers. Those are the ones that they know. They know their customers, and definitely you had customers that said, I want Joe to keep bringing my stuff. They became, part of the family of those businesses as they come and go.
So I guess if you saw them every week or however often they did a run, that you would feel like you did know the person after a while.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Well, kind of, since you weren't out in the trucks driving around, from your perspective, what did a typical day generally look like for what you were doing in the office?
Oh, wow, typical. I don't know if there's a typical, because just when you think everything's going to be okay. No, I don't know. It's a well-oiled machine. Each group, like we have had one section that was called error resolution. And that's if the customer calls and says, there's something on this invoice that doesn't look right, blah, blah, blah. Then you have this one team of employees that are checking on that. So you've got a lot of customer contact going on, even though people tend to think of accountants having this eye shade on and they're in this little room. But really in that accounting room area, they had regular contact with customers and talking to them and, doing whatever adjustments they needed to make if a mistake happened or whatever. And mistakes happen just because somebody might have put something in wrong. But no real every day, it's going to be a certain way, especially toward the end when you've got so much happening with technology. And they say, oh, here's the new thing. Here's what we're going to do now, just to make it better, make it smoother. Again, focus on the customer. And the employees, it did help us. It got to where, one whole section, and it was the central collections that specifically worked with the large companies. All the employees in that section got computers. I mean, that was a big deal. Prior to that, you had these terminal, fake-looking computer thingies, you wouldn't know, you're too young. Anyway, they weren't really computers. Not like they are now. Yeah.
Well, when a truck driver was out on the road, was he responsible or she responsible for bringing any particular paperwork back to you guys? Where the customer have to sign off on receiving something or mileage forms or anything that they had to give back to
They
prove?
had to do probably more forms back then, but now, nowadays as time evolved, the computers know exactly where that is and how long it took and whatever. So a lot of paperwork gradually has changed, and it's eliminated a lot of the paperwork because the computer knows where you are with GPS and everything that's going on. So yeah, a lot of that has changed. Yeah.
If somebody was out on the road and let's say the truck broke down or it needed some kind of a repair, how did that work? I mean,
Without cell phones?
Well,
that is a good question.
Well, I'm even thinking too, if from the financial side of things, like if someone was out there and was the driver responsible for paying for a repair and then you guys would reimburse them, or did you guys send people out with ability, like a coupon to get a repair at certain places, or any idea about
I
that?
have no idea.
Okay. Well, I just think of random things as we chat.
Yeah, I really don't know, but that's an excellent question, because back then, first of all, how is he going to communicate? He's stuck. He's out in the middle of this highway in California or whatever. And hello, no phones. I mean, no cell phones back then for a while. But yeah, I don't know. Good question. How's he going to do it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that would
I'm
be
sure.
a different world for sure.
We work for Yellow Freight. I'm a Yellow Freight truck driver and gets on the phone, calls whoever, but I don't know how that went. That's a part I never knew. I will tell you, you may have already heard this, but the Yellow Freight trucks, now the company's called Yellow Freight, but the trucks are orange.
Okay, I haven't heard this.
You haven't heard this? Oh, this is so neat.
Yeah.
Okay, Yellow Freight, way back in the early years, they got involved with DuPont paint company. And what they were trying to figure out is, what is the safest color? Like when you've got your truck going down the road, how far down can you see that truck? Because we want people to see our trucks. So for safety and for, it advertises. That's a Yellow Freight truck. And so they found out that swamp holly orange was the best. So even though it's Yellow Freight, it was an orange truck. And that always got a lot of questions. Oh yeah, you work for Yellow Freight, that one that has the orange trucks. Yeah.
Well, what prompted the name Yellow Freight?
That's a good question. I don't know. I knew. I once knew. I forgot. You could probably look that up.
I probably can.
You might have to look at it. Let me know, because I forgot.
Okay.
That's terrible.
No, I'm sure there must be a rationale.
22 years. I bet I knew. Yeah, had to have known.
Well, are there other kind of favorite stories or memories that just stick out to you as funny or noteworthy, or things we look at back on today and be like, that's very different than what we would think of as something today?
I don't know. The thing I notice is more and more what you see is with deregulation, you have changes. What Yellow Freight did was they ended up having a subsidiary that was non-union, and yet they had union. So they had a subsidiary called Saia, S-A-I-A, I think it's how it's spelled. But it was a non-union carrier. So that got them involved, that protects their customer base. If one is going on strike, then they can go on. But it was interesting to watch both of those under the same roof and under the same ultimate management. But you saw that with other companies too, going in there where they could have, a variety. For example, the union side had to be very careful about, there was a certain percentage of your shipments that could go by rail. Only a certain percentage if you were union. However, the non-union, Saia, they could stack those trailers up on the rail cars and move it And so that became an interesting diametric as for one company to have, because you're always,
I feel like you were competing against each other a little bit when one can do something and the other one can't.
Well, when one can't do, then the other, so it's ultimately all for the same company. Yeah. But that was interesting to see that. And now, of course, you have more and more companies that are, deregulation came in, made a lot of changes, and Yellow Freight ended up, absorbing Con Freight and Roadway, and and then you saw a lot of other companies, independents coming along, and that's changed a lot. And I'm not aware of, how the numbers go or anything, but all that hadn't really started as much as it is now, because you've got a lot of individuals that own their own truck, so it's interesting how they could maybe even compete.
It was back
with
then.
The larger.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, with the larger companies.
It was back then that Yellow Freight owned all their own trucks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess, from their perspective, since they acquired the other companies, was deregulation something that they were excited about when it came along, as opposed to being more anxious?
I don't know, at the management level. I don't know. It's a little scary right at first, just because you've got some of your best customers maybe that are going to be moving, and you're not there yet. You're still union. You haven't acquired Saia, so I would say it was worrisome of losing customers possibly, because maybe the non-union carrier that is a mom and pop operation, he could do it cheaper. You just hope maybe he won't do it as well as Yellow Freight, because they really prided themselves on, having an infrastructure to be able to handle it. Whereas mom and pop, maybe he wouldn't. Yeah. Or he or she.
Well, you certainly wouldn't be able to do the volume.
Couldn't do volume. Not like,
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I really enjoyed working for Yellow Freight. It was a great opportunity for me, and has opened doors. That's why I'm here today. Like you said, I was able to retire after 15 years with Yellow Freight. Had good bosses, good people to work with, and no, it was a fine company. I'm very proud to be able to say that I worked for Yellow Freight. Of course, then people always say, "Were you a truck driver?" No, I was in the office. What can I say? But no, those were 15 good years. Really did help prepare me for doing other things down the way, like volunteering for a nonprofit organization.
What is your official title here?
I'm president of Bonniebrook Historical Society. We're at 501c3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you have ever imagined back when you were working at Yellow Freight that you would end up in Branson as president of?
No. I would have said, do what? Are you kidding? I would have thought, well, once I retired, because it was, like I say, it was sometimes 7 days a week, and it was late at night, and you're working on a new system, you're doing whatever, and I would have said, no, I'm probably just going to sit out on the back deck and just sit there. But no, couldn't do that. Yeah.
Well, we're fortunate that those skills led you here, and everything else led you here to help with Bonniebrook.
Well, it's interesting because it does. All the skills that you gather along the way come in handy as president, as I'm giving presentations and I'm preparing grants and I'm doing whatever. Then I go back to my roots of the accounting and the, making proposals, etc. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for letting me chat with you.
Well, thank you. If you think of any questions, just let me know.
Okay.